Are you familiar with FBI Special Agent Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. I'm familiar with the name. I'm familiar with the name.
Joining me now is a frequent guest of the show, former FBI Special Agent, whistleblower as well, Kyle Seraphin.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public, and we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called The Kyle Seraphin Show. Follow him on Twitter. I'm Sebastian Gorka. I'll call you later. We'll talk guns. We'll talk optics.
Perfect, man. God bless you, brother. Thank you for standing up for the truth, man. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks. Well, so Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. Great chatting with you.
Kyle Seraphin, thank you.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Wednesday. It's November the 1st. It is a new month. We got a new deal here. We've got a conservative legend, Roger Stone. He's come on to get the Kyle Seraphin Show treatment to tell us who he is, what he's all about, what he's seen. I think you guys are going to be surprised. There's a lot of things I didn't know about Mr. Stone, and we're going to share you his story, his books, his experience at the hands of the FBI, my former employer, who was none too kind to him. Very interesting guy. I think you're really going to like this. And since it's a new month, coming into the end of the year here, we've also got a new sponsor we'd like to let you know about. Support them if it makes sense for you. We really appreciate them jumping out. They came to us. We haven't had to approach anybody. So this is very cool. Check out our new sponsor, and then we'll get started here. All right, you listen to the Kyle Seraphin Show, so you know that we don't think it's an if, but a when things get bad in this country. And when they get bad, you want to be prepared. One of my good buddies says you got two options. You can prepare or repair. I recommend you prepare, and you can go to 4patriots.com/Kyle. You can check out all of their survival goods, including their best-selling survival food. There is a thing called the rule of threes in the military. It's a survival concept. It says that you can go for 3 weeks without food, although I don't recommend it. You can go for 3 days without water, although that gets really rough. You can go for 3 minutes without air, but you can't go for 3 seconds without hope. Failure to plan is planning to fail. Don't be that guy that doesn't know what to do if the lights go out and you don't have a grocery store to go to. That's not where the food comes from. It should come from your pantry. They sent me the 72-hour food pack. We cooked some up. Kids ate it. No problem. This is a victory. Get it done by going to 4patriots.com/Kyle. You could throw something in your truck, in your van, in your minivan. Keep food where you are in case you can't get to where your food is. This is a real simple problem to solve. It's easy. You throw a couple dollars at it and you can forget about it. They're guaranteed for 25 years. That's an awful lot of time for you to be solving this problem. Go ahead and check it out. 4patriots.com/Kyle or use promo code Kyle if you go to 4patriots.com. All right. And there it is. Okay. So are you guys ready? Are you prepared for the stylings and the story of Mr. Don't call me Mr. Stone, Roger Stone. We're looking forward to it. Here we go, folks. Let's do this. And ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by a Republican Party legend, Roger Stone. He's going to come on and tell you, because many of you know the name and you know almost nothing else. So, Mr. Stone, thank you so much. I feel like I have to call you Mr. Stone. Is that appropriate?
No, call me Roger because I'm old, but I'm not that old.
I feel like in my generation, it was always a term of respect, but I can appreciate that. All right, I will obey by that. Roger, will you tell us where you grew up? I think a lot of people have a sense of your name, but they know nothing about the man and how you got to the point where you're sitting here wearing this hat. So where did you grow up and where are you from?
I'm originally from the New York City suburbs. I grew up in Connecticut in an Italian-American family. My parents were blue-collar workers. My father was a well digger. My mother did part-time reporting for a local newspaper, kind of doing community notes. And they were Democrats originally, but over time they became, I think, through my own activism, they became more attuned to the Republican Party. So they were what we used to call Reagan Democrats, who were originally Nixon Democrats. I myself am a veteran of 13 national Republican presidential campaigns. And I admit to you, at one time, I was a full-fledged member of the swamp. I was a very prominent inside the Beltway Washington insider in the old Republican Party. I worked for Richard Nixon, who was my mentor, still one of our greatest presidents. He ended the war in Vietnam, ended the military draft, saved Israel in the 1973 Yom Kippur War from absolute annihilation by airdropping $37 million worth of lethal aid to the Israelis, negotiated a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets, opened the door to China at a time that China was a backwards, dirt poor agrarian society in order to skillfully play them off against the Russians. There was no way for Nixon to see that 30 years later, the Bushes would give them most favored nation trading status, and the Clintons would sell them illegally our most sensitive defense secrets, including our missile targeting technology, which is really what those two things have made them the danger they are today. Anyway, I fell out with the Country Club Republican Party of the Bushes. And in 1979, I met a man named Donald J. Trump. And that changed my entire political perspective. So, although I am a conservative for sure, although I am a more libertarian oriented conservative, a very freedom oriented conservative, I eventually figured out that the whole Republican, Democrat, left, right thing is kind of a Hegelian device that is used to divide us, used to confuse us. That doesn't mean that there aren't good men and women in the Republican Party. There are. There are some. I'll give you an example. Senator Rand Paul is a great American. His father, Congressman Ron Paul, is a great American. But the Trump movement, the America First movement, really constituted the hostile takeover of the Republican Party. I have been in the forefront of that. I'm also a New York Times best-selling author. My book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, makes the compelling case that there was a cabal which murdered John F. Kennedy that included Vice President Lyndon Johnson, the man who had the most to gain, the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI, the Secret Service, organized crime, Big Texas Oil, and so on. Very proud of that accomplishment. I took that book to 6 different publishers, Kyle, and every one of them told me that it had no commercial appeal and nobody would ever buy it. It's a New York Times best-selling book that, with any luck, will send my great-grandson to college if it continues to sell. So, I think, to kind of summarize who I am part of this, as I think most people know, I was targeted by Robert Mueller because of my closeness to Donald Trump. And they basically hooked up a completely ridiculous, fabricated indictment claiming that I lied under oath to Congress in my voluntary testimony to the House Intelligence Committee when there was no Russian collusion to lie about. What would be my motive to lie? Well, you lied to cover up for Donald Trump. Cover up what? What was it I was covering up? As the Durham report finally proves to us, something I already knew, there was no Russian collusion. What they really wanted to do was to pressure me into testifying falsely against Donald Trump. I refused to do that. My wife and I went through 2.5 years of hell. You know what that's like. The economic pressure, the personal pressure, the stress. But I still refused to lie. I wasn't going to lie. And ultimately, although you'll have a hard time finding this on the internet, President Trump not only recognized that I was a target of political persecution, he not only commuted my sentence, but he also gave me a full unconditional presidential pardon. That last part is almost impossible to find online. It's been buried willfully. So it's, oh, you're a convicted felon. Well, you know what? Martin Luther King was a convicted felon. Jesus Christ was a convicted felon. It's just it's just vicious left wing name calling is what it is.
It's kind of incredible how, first of all, your story arc is wild. And I think many people are hearing some of those things and seeing all the bullet points that you just touched in history. And they just go, oh, my God, you're an observer to so many things. But also, you're exactly right. Like, there's some pretty good company that have been so-called convicted felons over history, and especially when it was about political persecution. When I was at the Bureau and I was at the Quantico, they were teaching us, that you never would do a standalone, what's called 1001 charge or false statements. It's like, and then there also has to be an underlying crime that you'd be a lot like, why were you being investigated, right? So you just pointed all that out. But I want to go a little bit further back. One of the things you said that piqued my interest, you said I was like a full-fledged or confirmed member of the swamp. Can you talk about it, your understanding of what that looks like? How were you part of it, and what was it?
Well, so after Ronald Reagan was elected, Reagan was our last outsider president. Prior to that, and he was not like Donald Trump. He was not the choice of the Washington Republican elite. He was not the choice of the rhinos. He was thought to be too extreme, too conservative, not electable. All of that turned out to be false. I was a partner at Black, Manafort, and Stone, which was one of the first premier political consulting and public affairs operations. The company did do lobbying, although I myself did very little, almost no lobbying, but we were the premier inside the Beltway firm. Then when the transfer of power was set from Reagan to Bush, this was something I could not buy. I never thought that the Bushes were conservatives. I never thought they were honest. I was concerned to this day, as I write in my book, The Bush Crime Family, another Amazon bestseller. I believe that that George Bush and the Bushes, George H.W. Bush, were deeply involved in the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. So I became disaffected from the Washington insiders, many of whom I had worked with, and many of whom I had seen up close. And of course, I was vilified because I started suggesting to Donald Trump that he run for president as early as 1988. I wanted him to run in 1988. I wanted him to run in 2000. I wanted him to run in 2012. I finally was successful, among others, in convincing him in running in 2016. And I think that he is not only was he already among our greatest presidents, but I think he is potentially going to be one of our greatest presidents again. There's only one man in history, one president, Grover Cleveland, a New Yorker, a conservative Democrat, actually, who was elected president, then failed to be reelected in a disputed election, and then returned to the White House. So it can be done. It has been done. The question is only, can it be done in time to save the country, given the disastrous policies of the current administration?
I'm sort of embarrassed to say that I don't remember the circumstances around Grover Cleveland and what was happening at that time. What was the backdrop in the country that happened during that contested and his, on and off?
You had a huge fight over our monetary system and whether the dollar should be backed with gold or silver. It was the defining issue of the day. Many people thought that the presidency had been stolen from Cleveland, who had actually been the governor of New York, been the mayor of Buffalo, been the sheriff, I think, of Erie County, New York. He was known for his honesty, but he was an outsider, much like Donald Trump, although he was a Democrat. The point, I guess, is just that there is a historical precedent, and we're in a race, in my opinion, against time, because the policies of this administration, these are not mistakes. These are not ill-conceived ideas, well-meaning but misguided policies. This is a willful effort to destroy our country, to flood our country with the illegals who bring with them drugs and pestilence and crime, to continue to print money like there is no tomorrow. We seem more concerned with the borders of Ukraine than with our own borders. And now I think we are very swiftly moving towards a two-front war. We're on the cusp, in my opinion, of World War III, and this administration seems to be prepared to move us there very quickly. So I really fear for the country, and I obviously deeply concerned about the weaponization of our judicial system and our law enforcement agencies and our intelligence agencies, because they're the only ones who can stop Donald Trump from being elected president. If we have a free, fair, honest, transparent election, Trump will win this election handsomely. They seek to destroy him through a series of prosecutions, both at the state and federal level, that I think is unprecedented and extraordinarily dangerous. I have been in that DC meat grinder. I know exactly what this is like. I predicted back in April that the judge in DC would, in fact, issue a gag order against Donald Trump, which prevents him from defending himself in public, in any public forum, including social media. The judge has now done that. The fact that she stayed it pending a hearing does not change my view that she will ultimately order that gag order, which I think is very deleterious to his campaign.
And really dangerous for the First Amendment. There's this concept, and I know it comes from people like Saul Alinsky talking about rules for radicals, but even more simply, there's always this push to do something at a sort of radical and extreme, push the envelope, and then pull back to a position that is less extreme, but still untenable, and they act like that's moderation. And it feels like this Obama appointee judge has kind of done that with this hearing, maybe. And if you want to reflect on that, I want to know about the inside, because you talked about some transitions that I think are going to be fascinating to people. But if you have thoughts on that.
First of all, Trump's lawyers filed a motion for a stay. So I believe, I'm not an attorney, but I believe the judge is essentially required to hold a hearing, and she'll do that. But the arguments that his free speech rights should not be infringed because he is a candidate for president, among other reasons, has already been rejected by this judge. And I suspect that he will be gagged. In my case, the judge issued a gag order on me. The putative reason for this was that my defending myself on what by then was my anemic social media following, because I was banned for life on Twitter, now known as X. I was banned for life on Facebook. I was banned for life on Instagram. I really had no forum to defend myself. But the reason I had to be gagged was because I might taint the jury pool through the defense of myself. The problem with that is that in my case, the judge left the gag order on me after I was convicted, when I was awaiting sentencing, and after I was sentenced, awaiting the date to be incarcerated. So it's pretty clear that the goal was to just silence me, period. In other words, let's gag him before we lynch him. That's kind of the way it works in DC. We did learn after the trial that the jury forewoman in my trial, the one who said during jury selection that she had no idea who I was, she was unfamiliar with my case, had in fact been attacking me and President Trump on both Twitter and Facebook, but kept those attacks on me in a private setting and then tried to quietly delete them after the trial was over and I had been convicted. Thanks to the journalist Mike Cernovich, we learned about that. Should have been, by all legal basis, grounds for, at a minimum, a new trial, although a new trial, after I spent $3.5 million that I had to raise penny by penny for my defense, would have been impossible to finance, and probably would have had, given the jury pool in DC and the animus of the judge, probably would have had the exact same result. I still should have been entitled to a new trial. But here's what I learned in DC. The rules, the evidence, the Constitution, the facts, reality, none of these things matter. They don't matter. Uh, not in the District of Columbia. Even today, after church, I take my family to lunch, and I have some bozo calling me a Russian spy and a Russian traitor. The government produced no evidence whatsoever at my trial that I was in touch with any Russians, and the one conversation I did have with Guccifer 2.0, who the intelligence agencies insist is a Russian asset, took place months after the WikiLeaks had already published the alleged hacked information from the DNC. So it's after the fact, impossible to therefore for me to have colluded with him. By the way, the contents of our 28-word exchange on Twitter direct messages is completely innocuous. As you put it best, there is no underlying crime. What was the underlying crime? What was the motive for me to lie? I did make misstatements, but they're all completely irrelevant. They're minor. It was just an effort, essentially, to find some basis to charge me so I could be pressured to turn on Trump. That's because they found no evidence of Russian collusion, so they had to try to manufacture it.
Sure. And people are now becoming aware in the same way that they're seeing that the FBI uses sort of entrapment cases that are morally equivalent, if not legally equivalent in the counterterrorism case. They're doing the same thing, these perjury traps that people are finding. And you and Michael Flynn and some of the others were sort of victims of it. Okay, I want to dig back into something. You just said that there's basically no concept of Constitution facts. They don't play by the law in D.C. How long do you think that's been the case in the D.C. court system?
It has certainly been true since Obama became president. I mean, it's very hard to find a Republican judge or a partisan judge there. I mean, for example, when I was gagged, I believed that my gag was unconstitutional. I still do. So we filed a writ of mandamus, which was the only legal way to challenge it. And the circuit court sat on that for 8 months. That's 8 months in which I'm taking, incoming from CNN, and MSNBC, and the Washington Post, all the dominant news media within the jurisdiction where I was going to go to trial. Then, literally days before my trial was to begin, the circuit court ruled that my writ of mandamus, was not ripe for a decision because I had not 8 months previously asked the judge who put the gag order on me to remove it, which of course she would never have done anyway. So they stall. It's a perfect example. That's why I am not optimistic, even though the judge in D.C. has, I guess, scheduling hearings over the current gag order. Donald Trump needs to be very, very, very careful. They would like nothing better than to charge him with violating a gag order as a pretext to incarcerate him prior to trial. I know that people find that hard to believe. They shouldn't. It's reality.
It makes perfect sense to me. My friends and I have a very simple statement about this. The process is the punishment. And you've experienced it. I know we've experienced it, but I think Donald Trump is experiencing it too. It's a weaponized process. And so it doesn't matter if you go through the right steps. There's always some technical, violation that they're going to find, and they're going to be able to get the outcome they're looking for. I want to trigger back to something you said earlier. You talked about the transition from Reagan to Bush. And I think that is probably a fascinating look behind the curtain that many people do not have access to. And you were in a unique position to see so. Can you talk about the sort of discussions, the meetings, maybe the letters or the phone calls that were taking place to hand power from one organization, from one regime to the next, and what those decisions were made on, and who made them, and when they decided, like, this is the next candidate we're going to push forward, and how and why? Because a lot of that insider baseball, nobody ever sees it, and maybe nobody ever will if it's not talked about, and it's been written about, but it's not accessible in a form where you're a firsthand participant in some of that stuff, I imagine.
Well, the crucial decision, in my opinion, goes back to the Republican National Convention in, I guess it would have been Detroit. And it was at that juncture that Ronald Reagan had decimated George H.W. Bush. Now, George H.W. Bush had lost 2 races for the U.S. Senate in Texas, had existed politically on the basis of a bunch of appointments, first by President Nixon, who had a political debt of gratitude to George H.W. Bush's father, Senator Prescott Bush, who was a partner at Brown Brothers Harriman and also the U.S. Senator from my native state of Connecticut, and later Gerald Ford. George H.W. Bush became CIA director under Gerald Ford only on the condition that he sign an agreement that he would not be a candidate for president or vice president in 1976. Bush Sr. always resented that, thought that Gerald Ford's chief of staff, Don Rumsfeld, later Secretary of Defense, had maneuvered to keep Bush out of the vice presidential sweepstakes and thus out of the line of succession. When the political directors for Ronald Reagan met, and there were 10 of us, to talk about who should be vice president, there was not a single person who supported the appointment of George Bush. Not one. Yet 2 nights later, Reagan had become persuaded by pollsters and others in the party that he needed suburban moderate votes and that George Bush could help him get those. And that is when I think the fatal decision was made. That was when Ronald Reagan essentially breathed life back into the dead political career of George H.W. Bush. The chemistry between the Reagans and the Bushes was never good. Reagan did not have much respect for Bush because he had vanquished him in the famous Nashua debate of 1980. But if you want to pinpoint the exact point in which those who really had controlled the country since 1963 upon the assassination of John F. Kennedy, strangely enough, although a millionaire, also your previous outsider president, not the choice of the Washington power establishment, although very popular in the media, I would tag it to the rise of George H.W. Bush, who spoke openly about the New World Order. That's what we're experiencing right now. This is the New World Order that he was speaking about. As I said, I've written an entire book on this called The Bush Crime Family. It's available at stonezone.com. You should check it out.
100%. And all this stuff is so fascinating that you think about, there was a time when the media and the so-called establishments were not the same thing. At some point they fused. Do you have a sense of when that happened, when they kind of got in line and got their marching orders issued from the same place?
It's very hard to put your fingers about it. They were always more establishment oriented than not, but there were outliers, and the media had a greater balance. So there were more conservative media outlets. There were more liberal media outlets. Today, it'd be very hard put to pinpoint a conservative-oriented national newspaper. There are none that exist. But we also know, and has now been documented, that the Central Intelligence Agency invested a lot of money and time into infiltrating and buying media assets under Operation Mockingbird. No, this is not a conspiracy theory. It's interesting, the guy who blurted this out was Carl Bernstein. Woodward and Bernstein, of course, were the 2 celebrated Washington Post reporters who created the false narrative surrounding Watergate. But when Bernstein began to believe that Woodward was going to cut him out of a lot of the profits from the book, All the President's Men, as well as the movie, he published a very important and I think seminal piece in Rolling Stone magazine, which was as left-wing then as it is today, outlining Operation Mockingbird, basically saying, if you guys are going to cut me out of the money, well, I'm going to expose your entire phony deal. The point people need to understand today is that the people who are claiming to practice journalism at the Washington Post, at the New York Times, at any of the 3 networks, particularly ABC, these people are all government paid for or government controlled assets, every single bit of them. Ken Delanian, for example, at NBC, was fired by the Chicago Tribune for clearing his stories with Langley, with the CIA, longtime CIA operative, even today. Now, he would tell you
What
that
could go wrong with that, Roger? What could go wrong with just making sure the government's cool with your stories?
particularly since you're probably on their payroll. And now, he would try to convince you he's just an honest reporter. I have a very good friend who recently left NBC, had a very storied career as a journalist, and was an honest reporter, literally had no biases. I think called them as he saw them. Took a job at NBC, didn't last 6 months, came away saying, this isn't journalism. This isn't a news outlet. This is a propaganda front. And that is really the case. So and of course they weaponize the internet, particularly Google. So sure, I'm very well known, but if you put my name into Google in a news search or even a web search, the first 45 pages will be 100% negative, and will give you a number of false impressions. Sorry, no one ever produced any evidence of Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration on my part. In fact, Kyle, it's more incredible than that. On November 3rd, 2020, which is Election Day, the busiest news day of the year, because a federal judge ordered it, the Department of Justice was forced to release the last remaining long redacted and hidden sections of Robert Mueller's final report, in which he admitted that he had found no evidence of Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration or any other crime on my part. And even if he had found, conversation between me and them, which he did not, it would not necessarily have been illegal. You know where that was reported? Virtually nowhere. Zero Hedge covered it. The Gateway Pundit covered it. That's about it. So all those news outlets that continue to insist that Stone was convicted of being a Russian spy, a traitor, which is 100% false, they have never repeated that even Mueller's report contradicts that. It's galling, but it's part of life.
No, it's hard to stomach a lot of those, and I've seen my friends smeared, and I've seen you smeared, and I think a lot of people in my generation right now, I'm in my early 40s, we look at it and we assume that whatever the mainstream media is saying, we sort of set our clocks the opposite and assume that's probably the case, which is probably the safest bet right now. But being able to manipulate, being able to get, maybe not manipulate is the right word, but being able to help guide media narrative has always been part of political strategy. It's always been part of what's been going on. And I'll tell you kind of a quick story from my father, who grew up in the news business and was at KCBS when Reagan was elected. He mentioned to me that Reagan would bring all of these, once a week, they would bring in a bunch of local reporters from all over the country to sit down and have breakfast or dinner or a lunch at the White House and have access to the staff in a way that many people had never seen. And which was a brilliant move, by the way, because it built a lot of goodwill and it allowed him to bring his message direct. Do you know who was involved in allowing and sort of doing that and setting up that sort of decision process? And then has it gotten weaponized from there, that sort of cozy relationship to whatever we see right now?
What was your father, Barry Serafin?
No, his name is Charlie Serafin.
That's right. I misspoke. Pardon me. Got it. Look, I think that there was a lot more access back in the 80s. I think everything was less controlled. More recently, the press is monolithic. They're completely lockstep. There's a one-decided narrative, and if you disagree with that narrative, you're censored. The irony here is there's the people who want to censor us in violation of the First Amendment, the people who want to deny us due process in violation of the Fourth Amendment, the people who want to mandatorily vaccinate us in violation of the Third Amendment, I believe it is, the people who would like to cancel the Second Amendment. They say that we are a danger to democracy. The people who are searching us without warrants, and as you know, there have been thousands of those now determined. Those are the people who say that we, not they, but we are the danger to democracy. So you're right. right out of Alinsky's rules. It's exactly backwards as to what is really happening.
When did the left start using the word democracy the way they're doing right now? Because we have a constitutional republic, and all of us on the right that push back say that. But it seems like every single person's got the exact same word in their mouth, and it's always a danger to our democracy, whether it be Biden or whether it be Pelosi or anybody else. They're just harping this democracy thing like we have a majority rules in this country, which we obviously don't.
Well, it's part of their talking points, just like people like us are white supremacists, which of course we're not, or that we're Christian nationalists. Although that one's a little harder to break apart because, yes, I am a Christian, and yes, I am a nationalist if that means you're proud of your country and you support the Constitution. But name calling, particularly name calling people who've been gagged or censored, is really their standard operating procedure at this point.
No, it definitely seems that. And it's effective for the people that want to hear that message, that don't want to go outside of the sort of approved channels for the narrative. You mentioned Gateway Pundit. You mentioned, who was the other group that Epoch Times has been doing some kind of
Epoch Times.
Zero Hedge.
There's a handful of very good journalistic operations out there, but the Stone Zone.
Stone Zone, clearly.
StoneZone.com, one of the best. The point, of course, is
that you just channeled a little Donald Trump right there. I heard it.
Yeah, just go look for any of their stories in your SEO search, in your Google search, and if they're there at all. Gateway Pundit's not there at all; it's buried. So they manipulate people's access to information even when it exists.
Yeah, maybe you can talk about kind of the rise of this alternative version of media and sort of the importance, I think, that's facing our country with it.
It's why, for example, your podcast, I think, is very, very important. I encourage people to not only watch it, but to tell other people about it so they watch it. The bottom line of it is, at least for the short term, no one controls the internet. There are large companies that control software that is in very common use on the internet. So it allows them to dominate the internet. But until they begin taking away URLs, which of course could happen, there are still beacons out there where you can learn the truth. We have talked about several of them. And therefore, it's important that people not only do what you and I do every day, which is to have a daily show. I also do a WABC New York radio show every weekend at WABCradio.com from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern time. It's important to have these outlets that tell an alternative version of what's going on based on truth, based on facts. But they make it harder and harder. They also put severe economic pressure on you. So to this day, although I'm back on Twitter, now known as X, and I'm there under Roger J. Stone Jr., and I'm glad to be there. I make no bones about it. I'm still banned for life on Facebook. By the way, there is a Roger Stone on Facebook. He uses the bio that I have up at X. He uses my photo from X, but that is not me. Do not follow that person or persons because it is not me. Believe me, if I set up a profile on Facebook, it would be taken down tomorrow. I'm not really sure what the purpose of this fake profile is, but believe me, it is there. Same is also true of Instagram. Now, what's weird is they never tell you why you're banned. Just one day you just disappear.
That's right. Unappealable.
They don't even notify you. And of course, my first instinct was to try to sue them. And then I learned they're essentially unsuable because they're a private company. And now, as you know, there's a case going to the Supreme Court as to whether the government can be actively involved in pressuring or urging these social media giants to suppress information. Suppressing information that's dangerous to our republic. The point is, they want to crack down on disinformation or misinformation, but that presumes that they're the arbiters of what is misinformation or disinformation, which is, of course, not true. For example, just to give you one perfect example, the Ukrainians are kicking the daylights out of the Russians in that war. No military expert I know, no general, nobody in the military, retired or active, tells me that that is the case. but that's the prevailing narrative. And if you want to go on any place on media and say otherwise, well, you're going to be censored.
Yeah, yeah, of course you are. And I agree. I have friends who are also have been front line there and said that it's awful, it's atrocious. So that's kind of sad too. I want to dig into some. It's not really conspiracy, but I think it actually is the things that people think are in a very conspiratorial tone. We talk about things like the deep state, which I like to call the administrative state. I think it's a little less sexy, and I think it's a little more accurate. But I'm curious about your experience with it. You've obviously been a victim of government agency weaponization, and I think that's pretty well documented. If people want to go and find their own information and dig into it, tell me about what you see as maybe the rise of the deep state, how it came about, and the way that it's actually implemented from your perspective on a political operative as a strategist.
Well, I think President Dwight Eisenhower was the first one to warn us this was coming. He called it the military industrial complex. It is basically the consolidation of power between both parties, the politicians in Washington, the think tanks, the defense contractors, and all of those who have an interest in both control and money. It dominates both parties. Took me a long time to see that. I mean, I'm a former young Republican national chairman. I have an abiding sentimental attachment to the old Republican Party of, Abraham Lincoln and Dwight Eisenhower, Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, who I worked for in 3 presidential campaigns, Senator Bob Dole, a great veteran, great American, and of course, Donald Trump. So it took me a while to figure out that there's really one party in Washington. That's the Uniparty, and they control everything, including their allies in the media. Now, whether they control the media, whether the media controls them, we could argue about that all day. But there is one ruling elite, and the perfect example of their power, of course, would be the entire COVID-19 pandemic situation and how it unfolded. Uh, will people fall in line again for a second pandemic? Remains to be seen. They don't seem to make many bones about the fact that they are planning one, or that one is about to affect us. So it's not a conspiracy theory to believe that they're all in it together. That's because they are. That's why there is one narrative. But it's also important to note that Donald Trump constitutes an existential threat to these people. Why? He is completely and totally uncontrollable. He's his own man. He sees everything through the prism of America first. Is it in America's best interest? Does it put American interests first? And he has risen to a level of popularity in the country based on his America First populism that makes him extraordinarily dangerous. They know that they have to head him off before the next election, because if he wins the next election, he's going to clean house. He's going to return to a government that is committed to America First principles and the Constitution of the United States. And that is why they are moving heaven and earth to destroy him, even as we speak.
I heard you say power and control, which I think are probably related or maybe the same thing. You said Donald Trump being uncontrollable, and you also mentioned money with the military industrial complex, the deep state. Is it that simple? Is it just about power and money and control?
It really is. Those people say, well, is it ideological? It is ideological in the sense that it is antithetical to freedom, but it is left and right. So the neocons, those who pursue endless foreign war, those who have squandered both our money and our treasure abroad, know no party. They're in both parties, but really what they're about is money and control of the people and vast profits. The contract to vaccinate members of the U.S. military was a $9 billion contract. Perhaps that's what COVID-19 was all about.
I think a lot of people think that money was certainly the root for that. We saw a bunch of billionaires come up out of nowhere. We saw a bunch of local businesses crushed. So that would make a lot of sense to me. I'm kind of curious. We're talking about a uniparty. We're talking about a swamp. We're talking about sort of a politically entrenched ideology. When you start getting down those topic lines, a lot of people in America that have started to get more and more fringe because they don't have any of the tethers of institutions to believe in anymore. They're all delegitimized. They start going to places like Illuminati, secret societies, families. There's always been legends and rules about that. Can you speak about any of those? Did you ever see that when you were running around in D.C. as kind of a member of the establishment, that this was what was controlling things?
I actually never did, because you see, I think it exists. I think these institutions exist. I don't think it is as formal as some of our friends think it is. So no, it's not like all the billionaires sit around a big oval table and decide what to do together. They have their own internal rivalries. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers fought over money and control themselves. So I don't think it is one tightly controlled conspiracy so much as it is a confluence of power in the hands of people who think uniformly. And therefore, you have essentially the same result. But I don't think the Illuminati gives out membership cards, for example.
I really appreciate that answer because it's the same thing that I saw in government agencies. You don't need to be told to act the way that Steve Baker did, for example, when he was it Steve Baker? Jim Baker, who was over at the DOJ and then at FBI and then went over to Twitter. He just acted in accordance because he was always a DOJ guy. Of course, he was going to act, and help out DOJ. He didn't need to have that secret memo pushed over to him and use his decoder ring. So I guess the question is this. I've got a microphone. You've got a microphone. You got a radio show. You got books out. People can, you're out there actively trying to inform people and sharing that. What is the average Joe in this country who's looking around saying, this is not the America I grew up in. This is not what I want to see happening. How do they make tangible movement towards a freedom and make sure that we actually have an election in 2024, which I've got friends saying it may not even happen that way. How do they move the needle on an individual basis so we can all kind of collectively maybe get back to some sanity?
Well, first and foremost, people need to not give up. They need to not look at the situation and say, this is hopeless. Things are so controlled. There is no hope for America. Secondarily, the role of prayer in my own life, which I've talked pretty openly about, and which I'm mocked relentlessly about on the internet because I've declared my redemption in Jesus Christ. I don't really care what those people think. I really only care what he thinks. That is an important part of this. But people need to stay involved. They need to be involved in politics. They need to be involved in the local school board. They need to be involved in the local county commission. They need to not give up on America, and they need to stay informed. Beyond that, we have to see how things unfold. It's amazing that with the tsunami of lawfare against Donald Trump and the absolute vituperation and attacks on him on a daily basis, he continues to lead Joe Biden both nationally and in all of the swing states, not to mention having a double-digit lead for the Republican nomination. So that is a testimony to the fact that people aren't stupid and they realize that we're headed towards $10 a gallon gas, that there's a 76% increase in the cost of groceries, that we're experiencing crippling inflation, that the average income continues to plummet, and that we are more concerned with the borders in Ukraine than we are with sealing our own borders. We are a majority. We should not lose sight of that. People need to stay involved. They need to continue to pray, and they need to continue to be active. Whatever you do, do not check out. Do not decide, oh, this is all untenable. This is all impossible. What would have happened if George Washington's ragtag army had said that at Valley Forge? The idea that army of misfits could take on the finest, most precise military machine on the face of the earth, the British Army, in 1776, that's unthinkable. Perhaps it requires some divine intervention, but it did happen. And it gave us the greatest country on earth, a country that is worth standing for, a country that is worth fighting. And I don't mean physically fighting, because that's the first thing they said. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, and this I think is key, and you can speak to this, people need to be not goaded into senseless or stupid acts for which you can be charged. they would like nothing better than to blame us for acts of violence or acts of lawlessness. And people need to make their protests civil, legal, and orderly. I think that is absolutely key.
Discernment is one of those pieces that kind of leads you to these proper actions. You talked about your prayer life. Could you kind of give us a taste of what you pray for at night when you close your eyes?
Well, look, I prayed that the president would recognize that I was being politically persecuted, and the Lord answered my prayers in terms of both the commutation of my sentence before I was to be put in prison for 4 years. The government wanted to put me away for 7 to 9 years. They wanted to give me extra time because I dared question the validity of the Russian collusion hoax. About that. Uh, I also, in all honesty, my wife was stricken with stage 4 cancer shortly after I was pardoned, which I think was brought on by the stress of the attack on me and our family, and the fact that we lost everything, our home, our savings, my car, my freedom to travel, my freedom to speak openly. It's a tremendously stressful situation. You are familiar with it. I prayed for her survival. And indeed, thanks to the healing power of Jesus Christ, she is now 2.5 years almost, a little less, cancer free. I pray for guidance because I do think I have some role to play in events going forward. I think my life was spared for a specific purpose. But here's what I found out, Kyle. God doesn't reveal his entire plan to you all at once. He reveals his plan to you when he is ready. And I'm ready to do his will, whatever that turns out to be. I pray for the safety of my family because I think with this many illegals in the country, it is only a matter of time before there is an attack on American citizens in our own soil, something I'm very concerned about and I pray about quite a bit. There's some examples.
I appreciate those. Can you tell us about some of the moments of doubt too, when you're going through these and you witness your government coming after you felt like you've been serving it for as many years as you've been involved?
Well, I certainly went through that. I reached a point. I mean, I was naive enough to think that when I was charged in this completely, fabricated indictment of lying to Congress about matters that did not matter, that concealed no underlying crime, most certainly not any Russian collusion or any collaboration with WikiLeaks, none of which the government produced any actual evidence of. I became despondent. I became depressed. I became angry. I became frustrated. I became fearful, not so much for me, but for my wife. I still have to struggle financially every month because it's hard to sell your books when you're banned on Facebook, when you're banned on Instagram, when you're banned in most places. People can follow me on True Social, where I'm real Roger Stone. It would be nice to be Roger J. Stone Jr. both there and on X, but some squatter has my real name on True Social, so I'm not allowed to have it. I'm not able to have it, but people can follow me in those two places. The economic pressure they put on you to this day is extraordinary. I got a subpoena from Hunter Biden's lawyers a week ago. They want all my records pertaining to Hunter Biden's laptop, which would be zero records whatsoever. Everything I know about Hunter Biden's laptop, I read in the New York Post. But you see, we have to create this fake narrative that somebody gave me the contents of the laptop and I passed it on to somebody else, and that person passed it on to Rudy Giuliani, and he's passed it on to the New York Post. It's total BS. It's false, but I still have to go retain a lawyer who practices in Delaware to move to quash this subpoena. It's just a time-consuming, financially draining, stressful, but that's the way it is. I mean, I have 11 outstanding other lawsuits filed against me, all of them meritless, all of them baseless, all of them groundless. This is what they call lawfare. It's what they're doing to Donald Trump, but on a much larger and I think more dangerous basis.
If you knew the kind of troubles that you were going to go through starting back in 1988 when you started recommending to Donald Trump to run, would you continue on the same path if you knew then what you know now?
That's a very difficult question. I think the answer is yes. I think I was saved for such a time as this. I think I have a role to play. I'm grateful for my freedom. I'm grateful for my wife's health. It would be, I could be very successful inside the Beltway lobbyist fixer right now if that's what I chose to do. But I chose to support the America First candidate, and I have no regrets whatsoever about that. I think Donald Trump changed the course of history. I think he's going to change the course of history again. I just want to be there to help him once again.
What are some of the techniques that he's suggesting? If people wanted to break it down into soundbite format, he's going to go through and he's learned whatever the lessons were from 16 to 20, tactics and techniques that he can go in and combat some of this evil that's going on in our government.
Look, I think that he came to the presidency not being involved in politics and therefore having the false but understandable thinking that there were two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, and that the Republicans would rally around him as the leader and the Democrats would oppose him. Uh, that's not, of course, what happened. It took him a long time to realize there was a fifth column within his own party that was dedicated to removing him from the moment he became president. Unfortunately, he appointed some of those people to high and powerful offices. I don't want to name any names, Rod Rosenstein. Uh, but I think that he will not make that mistake again. I think he understands that he has to clean house if he is elected top to bottom. He has to start with good men and good women who support the America First principles. And I don't think he's going to make the same kind of mistakes he made the first time.
What specifically would you call America First principles? How do you break that down instead of the TM version of it?
Well, I think it's pretty simple, which is every decision, whether it is a trade decision, whether it is a military decision, whether it is an economic decision, does it put the interests of the United States first? Shipping $100 million of aid to Gaza when we have 370,000 homeless veterans in this country does not put America first. There's just a perfect example.
How many countries are you aware of that tax their citizens, take those tax dollars, and then turn around and send them to support programs in America?
Say that again. I'm sorry, I missed your point.
How many countries out there in the world are taxing their citizens, taking their tax dollars, and then sending them to aid packages for the United States? What aid do we receive?
I think that answer would be zero. It's time to put America first. In other words, there are hungry people here. There are people who need help here. There are veterans who don't have adequate health care here. There are homeless veterans here. There are people struggling here. Why are we shipping billions of dollars to Ukraine? This makes no sense to me. And this whole narrative that, Vladimir Putin, who is a bad guy, by the way, no one disputes that, but he's not fighting in Ukraine because he wants to take control of Ukraine to bring back the faded glory of the old Soviet Union. He's fighting in Ukraine because we signed a treaty in which we agreed not to put NATO-based Western missiles pointed at Russia on the ground in Ukraine. And we're violating that treaty. He's warned the Ukrainians and us multiple times. Look, here's the easiest way to wrap this up. Weakness breeds aggression. Whether you're the Russians or the Chinese or the Iranians, when you see Joe Biden and you see his policies, what you see is a lack of resolve and weakness. You also see policies that don't make any sense. Giving $6 billion to the Iranians and trusting them to use it for humanitarian purposes only when they're screaming death to America at the top of their lungs, that doesn't make much sense. If Trump were still in the White House, there'd be no war in Ukraine. There'd be no danger posed to Taiwan. There would be no attacks in Israel because of the unpredictability of Donald Trump. None of this would have happened. But as long as this administration continues these policies of weakness and failure, I think the possibilities for World War III are very, very real.
Yeah. And I'll add that I probably would still be an FBI agent, and you probably would still be unindicted and never arrested by former employers. So we would have had some other very difficult outcomes. I'm curious about this. You spent a lot of time around D.C. You've met a lot of the players that people just know of from headlines. Is Joe Biden unique in sort of the picture of corruption that we see, or is he closer to the standard of what exists in that area?
Joe Biden is kind of unique in the sense that Democrats don't even like him. He was not their first choice for president in the last election. Uh, he was the last man standing. I think the Democratic Party and I think the federal government is run by Barack Obama. I think he's the single most dominant and influential Democrat in the country, certainly the most dominant person in this administration. And Joe Biden, generally speaking, not well liked in the Senate, even by Democrats. I forget who it was who correctly said he's been wrong. I guess it was Robert Gates, the former Secretary of Defense, who served under both Republicans and Democrats. Kind of wonder how that works. Said that Joe Biden has been wrong on every major foreign policy issue in his entire career. He has always been a mean spirited, greedy, corrupt, self centered, loudmouth who was never particularly well liked. I think they made him president because they knew he was controllable because of the vast evidence of corruption that exists about him. But I think he was, even prior to his having dementia, which I think he very clearly has, he was always a mean spirited, wise guy who thought he knew everything.
He definitely comes off. He always reminds me of that bully Biff from Back to the Future. I just feel like that's like the 80s analogy. The guy who just, he was, he grabbed a girl because he could. He punched a McFly because he could. He got away with it because he could. But now he's kind of decrepit and he doesn't really have any of his facilities and he's even meaner. I wonder if you'll look into your crystal ball with us for a little bit and give us some ugly predictions. What do you see happening in the next 12 months? Maybe the dark side of the ball and maybe the hopeful side that we can kind of work towards.
Very hard to see, but I mean, we've already designated 2,000 troops to go to Israel. They tell us that they won't be used in combat. I rather doubt that. I think we are going to see greater engagement. Is it possible that this administration could go out and purposely start World War III in order to utilize the War Powers Act to indefinitely postpone the next presidential election? Absolutely possible. That's a worst case scenario, but I think it's entirely possible. I sadly think there will, I pray that I'm wrong, but I think there will be terrorist attacks in this country again along the lines of 9/11. God, I hope that I am wrong. On the plus side, Donald Trump will crush the opposition for the Republican national nomination. Governor Ron DeSantis will be driven from the presidential race shortly. He's out of money and he's out of time, and he never had the chops. In fact, the efforts now he's spending his money attacking Nikki Haley. So one candidate who's running in single digits is spending millions of dollars to attack another candidate who's running in single digits. None of this makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, that all checks out. All right, I want to give you a chance to plug some of the other things. I appreciated you sharing your audience with me, so I wanted to make sure we did return that favor. Also, illuminate a lot of things. Give people kind of the best place to follow you, so I can direct them to one account, if you would, and then your preferred book, if they were going to read just one and get a taste of what you're about.
Sure. Go to stonezone.com. If you go to stonezone.com, you can see where the Stone Family Fund is if you want to help us on the personal side. My wife's still undergoing cancer treatments, and we still have a monthly struggle. You can buy all of my books, including You See the Bush Crime Family. If you were going to buy one book, I probably recommend to you The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. I think it is my best book. But you can also, you see the Roger Stones. That's a stone to which I've signed my name. It's a paperweight. You see Stone's Rules, my book with a introduction by Tucker Carlson. There you see The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ on the lower left, right there. Any of those would be, I think, most enjoyable if you like history and politics.
I appreciate all that. One of my really good buddies said that you're his personal hero, and he is absolutely like a staunch reader of your book, the Stones Rules. So I appreciate you joining me today, sir. Thanks for sharing your time with us, and I hope that I hope this country continues to pull out of it. I hope you don't stop speaking, even though we're dealing with some pretty precarious times.
Well, it was a great pleasure to be here, a great honor to be here. I'm glad to see that your own podcast is getting off the ground. Please let me know how I can help. God bless you.
You too, sir. Thanks so much. Today's podcast is sponsored in part by Patriot Coolers. You can find them at their website, patriotcoolers.com. You can also find them on social media at Patriot Coolers. Make sure if you order one of these fine products that you tag me as well, because I like seeing them. As a gearhead, you guys know I love seeing it. I like retweeting it. I like retruthing it and sharing it. Check out their page for hard-sided coolers, soft-sided backpacks and carryable coolers, and of course, the tumblers, which I've been carrying with me on and off duty since about 2017. They're a great company. They've got a great product. They support our show, and they support disabled veterans. Visit patriotcoolers.com. Use my promo code Kyle, that's easy to remember, K-Y-L-E, and support a brand that supports what you do. Patriot Coolers out of Houston, Texas, America is a good company with a great name that you don't mind showing off. Again, patriotcoolers.com. Using promo code Kyle, K-Y-L-E, to get 10% off, and shipping over $50 is always free. And we appreciate you supporting those who support our show. And that is our show. Thank you so much for joining us, folks. We do really appreciate it. We do stream it here live from Liberty Hill, Texas, in Texas, America, at 0830 Central Time. That's 0930 for those of you over on the West. Make that East Coast. Yeah, what are you doing over there? Why aren't you in America? Get in the middle here. All right, you can support this show by going to rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin, giving us a like, or you can give us a 5-star review on Apple, which is where our biggest audience is. We really appreciate it, and we will read them live on the show, like we will this one right here. Here it is. It says X7 Cowan. Cowan, do you own an X7? I don't know what that is. Love the show. 5 stars. Great insight from a patriotic guy that's willing to put his money on the table and isn't stuck on a certain person to fix the country, but an ideology of America and the Constitution. Ain't that right? That is correct. We are only here for the Constitution. We're in it to win it. We are only in it if it's America first. And I don't mean that with a trademark some politician assigned to it. I mean, we want America to win so that our kids can live under the Constitution the way that I grew up. That's what we're all about here. We do really appreciate your attention. Folks, give us a thumbs up as you leave the door on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. If you have not done it, you can also share us on all of the big platforms like Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and so on. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Kyle Seraphin. You can follow Ryan Matta at Ryan Matta, M-A-T-T-A Media on Twitter, or Ryan Matta on Rumble and on True Social. We do really appreciate all of you being here. We look forward to doing this again. We've got Lily Kate coming up next, so hold on to that for tomorrow. Folks, God bless you. Thanks for joining us. We're going to see you tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at